Welcome to the Dr. Tom Show. Today, I'm really excited to meet someone who I had a chance meeting with not long ago. And as soon as I met this person, I thought she's going to be perfect for the show and really inspire so many of you to really own who you are, what you do, and give us a little bit more education as to where she comes from. So Jo is an avid tea drinker, a lover of good people, and a self-confessed, obsessed lover of animals. She's a disability advocate working for equality and diversity, and she has set up something fantastic, which we'll hear a little bit more about later in the show, IJOT, to empower people with disabilities to create a world of equality and diversity, and to change the perspective of what disability means within society. Jo Tolley, thank you ever so much for joining us on the show. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's really good to be here.
I couldn't resist from I think we connected on Instagram and we met up at Starbucks, had a coffee, and I was really inspired by you. Like the instant I met you, I was inspired. And what really inspired me was how open and honest we were with the conversation, which was great, which I hope we can get into today. But for the context for our listeners, could you give us a little bit more background on, who you are, where you come from? We talked about your journey with your disability and how you kind of said you'd never do something, then you did it. And give us
Yeah, so I am a disability activist, advocate, facilitator, writer, and anything else you want me to be within that kind of field. Quite open to doing anything. I have quadriplegic cerebral palsy, which basically means that at birth my brain was slightly starved of oxygen. So that as a result means that for me, I'm a wheelchair user. My left side is weaker than my right, and all the other medical jargon that goes with that. But yeah, so I started out on this journey probably about 2.5, 3 years ago, because I'd always gone along the lines of not wanting to be associated with the disabled community. Not that I didn't recognise that I was disabled. I mean, it's quite obvious. I'm in a wheelchair. Like, you can't really get more obvious than that. But I wanted to do something that wasn't stereotypically disabled. But in doing so, I think I neglected a huge part of my life. So at the point where I was like, do you know what, none of this is working, like none of the career paths I go down seem to be working out for me, I'm just gonna see what happens. Then I kind of ended up on the TEDx Brave the Poor stage talking about equity and diversity in my journey as someone who has a disability, and it's sort of gone from there, really.
I think it's amazing. And it's not a small stage you spoke on. You spoke on a TEDx, didn't you?
Yeah.
Which is quite incredible, really. What was the title of your talk? Because that was really interesting when we spoke about that at the coffee shop.
It was I want equity, not equality. So equality is like the idea that everyone is treated equally and given equal rights and equal opportunities. And of course, that is 100% accurate. Everyone should be given that. Whereas equity sort of works on people's strengths. So the example that I use all the time is, just because I can climb a mountain because I have the right to, doesn't necessarily mean I should. Maybe my talents are better placed elsewhere. And it really the concept really gives people the opportunity to explore who they are and how they can be the best versions of themselves. But you kind of can't have one without the other. And I think everyone who sort of seeks equality ends up actually acting in equity, because everyone wants the best for themselves, and that's how you kind of get to equality, I think.
I would completely agree, and I think that's true in life. Regardless of ability or disability, really, we often do things outside of skill sets because we're told we should, instead of leaning into who we really are and achieving what we're really capable of. And I think you've really lent into your genius with IJOT and your journey now with setting up the podcast and really, really becoming an advocate and educating. And I'd like to get into some of those questions on education shortly. But what inspired IJOT? Tell us a little bit more about IJOT.
So IJOT, I would say that IJOT came from TEDx. Everything that I do now sort of has come from that experience of TEDx. And I've got a huge number of people to be grateful for because of that. So IJOT is, I've recently set it up. We basically empower people with disabilities to embrace who they are and craft a world that embraces equity and diversity in turn. So we're currently working with a non-profit organisation in Chicago called the NORA Project to create a mentoring program that really looks at relationships and how disabled people build those without it becoming a dependency or codependency on another person. We're really keen to build authentic relationships between the disabled community, and we have some fantastic mentors that are going to help do that, because I think it's really important that actually, yes, we are disabled and we are the disabled community, but we are only human. It's just another facet and aspect of humanity, and that's kind of where I come from.
I love that. And you talk about building relationships without them sort of being not sustainable, dependent relationships. What do you mean by that? Do you mean sort of friendships or work opportunities?
So I think for so many disabled people, and it's really important to notice that actually disability doesn't just mean wheelchair user. When we're talking about accessibility, so often we think about, oh, there's a ramp, it will be fine. Well, no, like disability, there's one in 5 people in the entire of the world that's affected by disability or has a disability. And so you don't see 1 in 5 wheelchair users. Like, that is just not the way it works. So for me, it's about ensuring that disabled people within the program and our mentees, who we get to find out who they are yet, but that they are able to use their voice, able to advocate for themselves, able to embrace their disability, but also defy the societal limits of it and create a friendship that is simply based on, do you want to go for a coffee? Yeah, that's great, let's go. And not, I need you to do this for me, because that then enables me to get on with the rest of my life. Because obviously we do have caregiving relationships. We do have friends that do us favours because there's certain things that we as disabled people can't do. But ultimately, friendship isn't based on that kind of relationship. Friendship is organic. And I think it's really important to instill that in young disabled people so that they're able to, yes, recognise their disability and recognise the benefits that it gives, but also just be who they want to be.
I love that. And I 1 in 5, 20% of our, the population having some disabilities is more than I thought. How can we help integrate better? How can we help, I don't even want to distinguish between abled and disabled, really, because I don't think there should be that distinction in society in terms of how we interact. But
There
how
shouldn't.
how do you think we can improve that? And how do you think we can bridge that gap?
It's really hard, because I think we're at this point now where, don't get me wrong, there's been activists and advocates before me that have enabled me to have this conversation with you today, right? And without that, we would still be in a place where disabled people were neither seen nor heard. But I think we've been given the rights, we've been given the equality, which then has enabled us to be treated equally on paper, right? But now we need to be, instead of just saying we have the rights and we're a minority, we need to be educating the non-disabled population as to how we are just part of society, how we are just one of them, because it's still a very us and them situation, and it shouldn't be.
How would you educate me? What would you say to me? What would you say to me to help educate me, about disabled people and how I can be fairer to them, if you excuse turn of phrase,
Yeah, I mean, I just go about it, and this is my personal stance. Everyone's different, but I will just start a conversation with you. And at some point, because my disability is so obvious and visible, naturally the conversation will come up. Like I didn't, when I first met you, I didn't go into it telling you that I was a disabled person and this is how you needed to treat me. We just had a coffee. And then we had a conversation, and now here we are. So yes, it's about kind of getting rid of the elephant in the room and having the confidence to do that as a disabled person, because we're the only people that can do that. If you've never had an experience of a disabled person, and don't get me wrong, you will have done without even realizing it, because there's far more invisible disabilities than there are visible. You're not going to know what to say to not offend people. You're not going to know what you can and can't say in terms of what they're able to do, both because of and in spite of the disability. So we need to take the responsibility to have that conversation, to break the ice, and just integrate ourselves. And in doing so, having a conversation and being really, really open with the conversation we have. I mean, I'm an open book. I'll pretty much just tell you anything within the first hour of meeting you, and not everyone is like that. But in order to make the conversation of disability not a conversation, because at the end of the day we are just human, we need to keep having the conversation. Does that make any sense?
It makes a lot of sense. I like how you said that the confidence to ask the questions, or to address the elephant in the room from the point of the disabled person, but from the point of an able person. I mean, I asked you, I remember we had the coffee and I asked you, what's your disability? And I felt really anxious to ask that question. And you
because
said,
you
well,
didn't know what the response that you were going to get.
Yeah, and sometimes it's out of fear of, like, even asking the question would be like offensive to the person that you're asking, and you're suggesting that maybe we should clear that elephant in the room first, and then
Yeah, I
society
mean,
should clear that elephant, I suppose.
it's really hard, because what you don't want to do is walk into the room and say, hi, my name's Jo, I've got quadriplegic or palsy, scoliosis, and this is how you should treat me, because actually that's counterintuitive to what you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But I'm always incredibly aware of how the other person might be feeling, and how anxious, like you say, how anxious you were to ask that question. So the best thing for me to do is to, at one point, slip into the conversation that I've got wonky legs and a way with words. Do you know what I mean?
Brilliant. But this comes from me, who's used to working with patients of all different abilities, and take someone in society who's not used to that, it does magnify that situation, really.
Yeah.
But I suppose it's because there has been this stigma for so long, and you're saying it should just be quite normal and natural, which I agree with. I mean,
I think also, I go along the lines of, as long as you're trying as a non-disabled person to just be inclusive, that's good enough for me. You're not going to get it right all of the time. Like there's been countless times, none of which I'll mention on here, where I've massively put my foot in it with another disabled person, because I've just not known how to what not to say, and that's, I am disabled. But the thing is, if you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person. Like, I cannot talk for the entire disabled community. My experiences are different, my disability is different, my perspective is different, and that's great. But it's, you know, it's not just the non-disabled people that get it wrong sometimes.
Well, I think you're right there, Jo, but that goes for everybody, because once you've met one person, you haven't met everybody, have you? You know,
Exactly.
everybody if we just took everybody as everybody, a completely different individual. And I suppose we have to learn that. Does it go the other way sometimes? Does it go the way that sometimes people are pandering to you too much? Does that
I hate that. I hate it. It's just like, you don't have to like me because I'm disabled. You're not going to get brownie points. Like, it's not the way that it works. Yeah, like me for me, and not because you think that you're going to diversify your friendship group, your network, by associating with someone that's obviously disabled. Like, if you don't like me, that's great. You know, that's fine. That's normal. If you like me, great. Let's go for coffee and a beer. You know.
Yeah, and I think that's quite a good point, because not liking someone is not the same as discrimination.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes we fear that it will be taken as discrimination if we're not inclusive. But we're human. Sometimes we like people, sometimes we just don't like people, and that's absolutely fine.
And that doesn't mean also that they're not a nice person. It just means that you don't get on with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, sometimes it does mean that they're not a nice person, but it's not polarized. It's not black and white.
Yeah, I absolutely. Now, I am intrigued. What would be, how would society be different? Like 20%, 20% disabled. How do you think society would be different if everybody just acted the same and didn't see the disabilities at all?
That is a really good question, and one that I don't know the answer to because we're not there yet. I think it's every advocate's and activist job to work towards doing themselves out of a job. When I'm at the point where I can stack shelves at Tesco's and just get on with my life, that's me done. Do you know what I mean? But I think we are getting there. We're getting there slowly. It's about inclusivity. It's about conversation. It's about communication. It's about not seeing the disability before the person, but in some cases seeing the disability before the person, because with invisible disabilities, which is not something that I can particularly comment on because I don't have that experience. You know, it's really hard to say, actually, I look normal, whatever normal looks like, but I do have this additional need, and you are going to have to cater for it because of X, Y, and Z. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'll get back to you when we've kind of got to the point where that's the thing, which, by the way, won't be in our lifetime, so maybe not.
But I have no doubt that you will do so much to move towards that. I have no doubt. Because you do have a drive and a spark, and you have a way of, you just have a really great way of communicating with people. And I think that's going to take you so far on your journey. And I'm so honored to have met you on that journey. To be able to selfishly sit back in a few years' time and go, I knew her.
The pleasure was all mine, really, because I did kind of accost you a little bit and go, can I come on your podcast?
Well, you made the cut. You also were on the BBC, tell me the other day, weren't you? What were you doing?
Yeah, so BBC rang me to do with something else that I'd done with them a few months back, and they were like, is there anything else you want to share? And I said, well, not really. I said, because it's Disability Pride Month, but that was July, but I don't really agree with it, going to find someone that doesn't have a good news story. You know, it might be nice to kind of end the news with something that's actually cheery for once. And they were like, no, we really want to speak to you. So yeah, I was on BBC talking about how disability pride is great, and don't get me wrong, like if you want to celebrate it, go for it. I'll hand you the banners and the balloons. But for me, it's not just a 1 month thing. Like disability didn't just rock up at the beginning of July and say, I'll come and live with you for a month
Mm.
and then leave at the end of July. It's not how it works. So, and this conversation is a conversation that we need to have all year round.
I love that. That's such an important thing. And you certainly are doing that. So if people want to find out more about IJOT, more about you, where can they go to do that?
So IJOT, the website is www.ijot.uk. I'm on Instagram, and that's i.jo.tolley. And Facebook page is Jo Tolley.
Perfect. Well, we'll put the links to that in the show notes, so people can definitely go and access those and find out more about you. Jo, if there's one piece of advice you could leave our audience with, what would it be?
Don't be afraid to have the conversation. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Nobody got anywhere without asking why. And I do that all the time, whether it's disability related, non-disability related. I'm really curious. So get curious. The worst thing that's going to happen is someone's going to say, I don't want to talk about that. And that's fine. And you'll go to the next person who happens to be disabled. You'll ask the same question and they'll give you an answer. So just ask a question.
I love that. My favorite question is why, so I will continue to do that. Jo, thank you ever so much for being on the show. You've been fantastic. You are an amazing person. I hope we can get you back on the show in the future.
And you need to come on my podcast as well.
I would love to. I cannot wait to. But thank you for giving me your time today. I really, really do appreciate it. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
And please, if you have listened to anything today that you thought was fantastic, I certainly have got so much from it. Please do share the show with anybody who you know could benefit from this and from the IJOT movement. Thanks, Jo. Have a great day.
Thank you.